Hi everyone and welcome to this session of Women Under Attack. My name is Ayshah Tull. I am a journalist and broadcaster for Channel 4 News. Occasionally they let me present, which is loads of fun. So I will be hosting this panel, and we have some wonderful people to speak to. I'm honoured to be here, honoured that Dorothy invited me here. And the rest of our panellists as well that we'll hear from have a wealth of experience, and I can't wait to hear what they have to say. So I'm going to briefly do that quickly. It's Parm Sandhu here with me on the left, and we've got Catrin Ingala-Smith here, Sufia and Parry. I will introduce them a little bit more in a second and a little bit more fully, so you know a bit more about their experiences, and they will introduce themselves as well. They're going to have a couple of minutes to do that. I just wanted to explain the structure for this session, very similar to what Saliha did in the first session. So we'll have opening remarks from each of these wonderful ladies here, and they'll tell you a bit more about their experiences and where they've come from. Then we'll have a little bit of a chat. I've got some questions. As a journalist, I know it's awful. Got a couple of questions. I'll get mine out of the way, but then I'm pretty sure that we're going to have loads of questions from in the room and also from our friends online who are watching. So they'll kind of come in here. I'll be looking at my phone, not rudely, but just checking all of the questions coming in just to make sure that I've got everything. So if you do see me occasionally looking at my phone, I'm not on Twitter. I'm not about to, Instagram or post something. I'm just looking at the questions here. And I wanted to take a brief moment to just give you the context of this session, Women Under Attack, and tell you about a story, one of the latest stories that I worked on at Channel 4 News. So in my role, I do lots of different stories, and unfortunately a lot of the stories I do happen to be women in violence. The last story that I did on that was a woman called Yasmin Chafiki, and I'm not sure if you have heard the name, and it's a quite horrific story. So she lived in Maida Vale with her two sons. One January morning she walked out of her door and she was attacked by her ex-partner. She was stabbed repeatedly, just meters from her door. And when I say her door was here, she was attacked here. A passerby, this was in broad daylight, in the middle of the day, a passerby saw what was happening. He was actually driving. He drove into the attacker and killed him. By that point, Yasmin was already dead. And I tell her story because these stories affect every single one of us, and they affect me. Every time I do a story like this, my heart breaks a little more and a little more. Karen did an analysis recently where she found that 125 women have been killed since the death of Sarah Everard. And Yasmin is sadly one of them. And so Sarah Everard, obviously we know also well, the anniversary of her death was this week. There are some other names as well, Bieber Henry, Nicole Smallman, Sabina Nessa, who I'm sure that we'll all kind of speak about and talk about their stories. But I just wanted to have this in your mind, that I want you to have these women's names in your mind during our talk and when we're speaking about all of these experiences. And just think of that when we come to the end and we talk about the solutions and what we can all do, because it's really hard to kind of hear all of these stories and think, gosh, this is awful. What can I do? And I want us to come away in this session with some practical things that we can do, and we'll get that from all of the panelists here. So I'll start with Parm, who is the former Chief Superintendent for the Metropolitan Police. She's the highest ranked Asian female in the police when she was there. She left in 2019. She also has a wealth of experience as well, and I'm sure she'll talk about that. But Parm is an extraordinary woman, and I can't wait for you to hear more from Parm. And next to her here we have Catrin Ingala-Smith, and on her Twitter bio, which I am going to read from, it just no, I'm not gonna go into your former tweets and stuff. I just love the bio. It was woman, feminist, Northerner. Yay. Pretty much all you need to know. Does what it says on the tin. Brilliant. She's also chief executive of the NIA charity and co-founder of Counting Dead Women, among other things as well that I'm sure she'll get into. So that's Karen's little bio there. And then we have Sufia Alam, who is head of programs at East London Mosque. Now, she has been working as a community leader, and particularly for Sabina Ness's case was key in kind of working out community relations just after that. And she's been kind of doing this role for 25 years. She's an amazing woman. So we'll talk to her about intersectionality as well. I can't wait for that. And last but by no means least, we have Kat Parry, who is a women's officer here. And she's also a final year student doing history as well. And when I had the notes about all of these wonderful women, something in Kat's notes really stuck out to me, and I just wanted to kind of share it about here. She said, "This is a women, non-binary and trans man college. Here you feel safe, and this is our space." And I want everyone to feel like this is their space, this is your space anyway. But particularly in this hour, I want you to feel that this is your space to kind of talk about these really difficult issues. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Parm to give her opening remarks.
Thank you. Can I just check everybody can hear me? And if you can't, wave and I'll shout up even louder. Good, no waves. Right, Parm Sandhu. I worked for the Metropolitan Police in London for 30 years. I loved it. I had an absolute whale of a time, enjoyed it. I'm not going to say that I enjoyed every single day, because I didn't. And there were some hurdles and obstacles that I had to overcome. But if you put that into context of me and my life, and I'm sure that I reflect the lives of many other women, I was born and brought up in Birmingham, in this country. For those of you who don't know where Birmingham is. And when I was 15, so I had a normal childhood. When I was 15, I came home, and my mum had this strange old man in the house. It wasn't my dad, it was somebody else. And he said, "It's time for her to get married now." So at the age of 15, they decided that I was going to get married, and I had a forced marriage. By the time I was 20, I was divorced and I had a young son. I managed to escape a domestic violence, abusive, you name it, it was there in that marriage. And taking on the police service was an easier option for me. Because when I was fortunate that somebody helped me when I was in Birmingham. And it was a woman, a Christian woman, who took me into her house. She had 4 kids of her own. And she said, "Come and live with me. I don't care if there's a 5th child in my house," because I was still a child. And she changed my life. From that, I came to London. I was disowned for many, many years by my family, but who then did forgive me. And I had an absolutely wonderful relationship with my parents later, but not at that time. So that's me. But because of what happened to me, because of the positive interventions that I had in my life, I decided that I wanted to be that woman who creates that bridge for others to cross and to have opportunities and a better life. We are in England. Forced marriages still take place. FGM, and for those of you who don't know what that is, female genital mutilation, still takes place in this country. Honor-based abuse, killings, they take place in this country. And you mentioned one murder. Every single murder is too many. I've dealt with those over 30 years. I could cry at the number of women that I've had to deal with. We talk about rape cases, and we talk about it's something like 1.4% conviction rate for rape cases. I can't explain all of the reasons for that happening, but I can explain some of them because I've been there. I've held the hand of that woman who's been raped. I've then tried to comfort her and help her through a rape suite where she's examined by a doctor. She stands there naked. She's swabbed, she's medically examined, her nails are cut for, forensic DNA. Then after that, she speaks to an officer, and it used to be me, and she used to recount that ordeal, which would then be written down. She'd then recount that at court. She would relive that ordeal the first time, the second time, and then in front of her abuser. That's one of the reasons why rape cases don't make it. It takes a huge amount of courage for any woman to report a rape. It takes even more courage for that woman to then go through the criminal justice system. And one of the reasons they're given a court date, it changes 5 times, 10 times. That woman's life is put on hold until she finally gets to court and says her piece. And she might be that 1% that gets a conviction out of it, but she might not be. She might be one of the 99%. So I've been there. I could talk about so many different people, women, people who matter, who have been affected by the criminal justice system and by what is done to them. I'm going to talk a little bit about policing, when we start our discussions. And I have to give credit to the first woman police commissioner, Cresta Dick. She did it. She was the first woman. Unfortunately, she failed a lot of women on the way, and she failed those women, Sabina Nessa, Sarah Everard. She failed because of certain processes that exist within an institution. And it is time for her to go, and it is time for a new set of leaders who can lead by example and actually look at what the changing society is that we are serving and what those society needs are today, not 40 years ago. Because you've got to be listening to your communities, to your women's groups, to your charities, and that's what was not happening. Sarah Everard died a year ago. Where's the plan? We keep hearing about plans. We keep hearing about reviews. Where are they? How many more women need to die before we actually have a plan that is discussed, that is consulted, where women's groups are being listened to? I'm going to end it there because that's why I'm here. And I want to make a difference to just one person, and I'd be happy.
Parm, thank you very much. Such strong and powerful words. Karen.
Hi, everybody. So, as you know, I'm Karen Ingala-Smith. I'm Chief Exec of an organisation that supports women who've been subjected to men's violence. That's sexual and domestic violence and abuse and prostitution. And I also do a project called Counting Dead Women, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And I am the co-founder and a director of the Femicide Census. So back in January 2012, and I've worked in women's organisations over 30 years. So back in 2012, I was coming back from a New Year holiday, and I got a phone call from work, which is very unusual when I'm on leave, to tell me that a young woman who had been referred to our services, she's 20 years old, she'd been abducted and found dead behind some wheelie bins in Hackney. When I tried to find out more of what had happened to Kirsty, I went online and tried to find out more about her death. And even though I've been doing this work by then over 25 years, I found report after report of women who'd been killed by men at the beginning of 2012. And just to try and get my head around how many there were, I started making a list of their names. And it turned out in the first 3 days of 2012, 8 women had been killed by men in the UK. And then I basically haven't stopped. So I have now, 10 years later, personally recorded the names of 1,400 women in the UK who've been killed by men. And, keeping a list of names, it might sound like a weird and pointless thing to do. But what got me really angry was one of those first murders was described as an isolated incident. Now, I understand in policing terms what that might mean, but if we've any sociologists in the room, you'll know that if we look at something as an isolated incident rather than within its social context, we're not going to see the background to, I guess, the conducive context, to use a phrase used by Liz Kelly, who's a feminist academic, that creates men's violence against women and connects all those forms of violence. So I carried on naming the women killed by men and talking about that on social media, and was contacted by a lawyer at Freshfields, a big international law firm in London, and she was interested in building up a body of evidence to look at litigation against the state for state failure to protect women's rights to life. And amazingly, the most comprehensive source of information that she could find on women killed by men in the UK wasn't on some police website or on a government website or in an in the information released by the ONS. That's the Office of National Statistics. It was my list, just some random woman in a back bedroom in Walthamstow. So we got together and we started a piece of work that would become the Femicide Census, and it's now the UK's most comprehensive source of information about women killed by men in the UK. So because of the Femicide Census, we can say now, we now know that 92% of women in the UK were killed by men are killed by somebody that they know. 62% of women who were killed by a man are killed by a current or a former ex-partner. Women like Sarah Everard are fortunately rare. Only 8% of women in the UK who are killed by men are killed by a stranger. And that's the same percentage of women who are killed by their sons, which I found really one of the most shocking things. If you think about, as women, all the steps that we take to protect ourselves from stranger dangers, yet the same amount of women who are being killed by strangers are actually being killed by sons. Now, there's loads of differences going on in the demographics of those men, but I just think that statistic is quite shocking. And I said I could talk a long time.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. It's okay, I'm watching.
We all know Sarah Everard's name, and we all know Sabina Nessa's name, and we know Nicole Henry, and Nicole Waterman.
Bieber Henry and Nicole Smith. Yeah.
But since Sarah was killed, at least 126, it's gone up. Of course, it's always going up.
I looked 2 days ago on that, so that's crazy.
And it's more than that, because I keep a B list as well as the main list, and that until a man's charged, I don't add a woman to the main list. And there are several women, for example, who've been stabbed, and well, they didn't stab themselves, did they? And they're very unlikely to have been killed by a woman. So it's higher than that. But it's always the young, attractive woman killed by a stranger that we get to know about, the woman who was just walking home. It's more often, much more often, a white woman. So, of those 126 women who've been killed since Sarah, other than Sabina Nessa and Yasmin, who you mentioned, most people won't know their names. You won't get to hear about the 82-year-old woman who was stabbed by a 84-year-old husband, or the 26-year-old woman whose body they found in bin bags under somebody's floor with a 2-year-old daughter who'd been killed by the same guy. And they think that the little girl had been sexually assaulted, as well as her other child who survived and managed to escape this man. Now he hasn't gone to court yet, so we may hear more about that. But that woman was missing at the same time as Sarah Everard, and I don't think many of you will know her name. In fact, if anybody could name her, I'd be really surprised. And it's not the immigrant woman, it's not the woman who's had drug and alcohol problems because she'd been raped from being a baby by various men until the day that she died. So I get really angry about the hierarchy of women in death, but you see that in life also, in access to services. And I'm going to stop now, because if I do carry on, I just won't shut up, will I?
And I know that we'll have loads of questions about everything that you said. And I did a story about femicide in Paris, and actually your femicide census is something that I used, because there wasn't, even as journalists, we didn't have that resource, which is quite shocking. So thank you, Karen. And I'll go on to Sufia just now.
Okay, where do I start? I think, first of all, to thank you for compiling those stats, because those are the stats that motivated me to start my journey on supporting women, and especially women from ethnic minority communities. I worked for a women's organisation for the best half of my life, 28 years now. And what women's organisations do is create a safe space for women to come, and it's recorded. It takes 35 attempts for a woman to come and report a domestic abuse. And many people live in silence, and it has a vicious cycle which affects their children and their mental well-being. So back in 1997, I remember being part of the Jagannarii Centre, and we had Women's Aid based there. And we were branded as an organisation and as a community leader as marriage breakers, because we were taking on disclosures from women and creating safe places, and, you know, women that were beaten black and blue. Women who didn't have language. So being an advocate, we were vilified, and it was mostly vilified by men in our community. Now I work in one of the poorest and most deprived boroughs of Tower Hamlets in London. And deprivation has its own issues, but it's no means an excuse of, to abuse women or young girls. Our local authority, Hamlets Council, is quite dedicated in terms of the resources that they put in, but year on year we're hearing of women being abused and by men, or women being abused for many, many years, many decades, and only just coming. So in the Mariam Centre, we provide not only a prayer space, which is assigned to the East London Mosque, but it's a safe space where we provide counselling, information, advice and guidance. We've had our staff are trained as violence against women and girls champions, where they can take reporting, just listening until women are ready, and also providing that safe space where they can discuss the issues, the processes, because it takes a lot, especially for Muslim women, to come out of that marriage or that situation, because often we see financial abuse, we see honor-based violence, and the family network is very close, so it's really difficult to come out in the first place. So my work has been around women's empowerment and development and education. So 8 years ago, being one of the first managers of a women's institution in the heart of the community and the Muslim community, obviously Muslim women don't only face domestic abuse, but hate crime of a different level. And I've spoken about this at Parliament and Women's Equality Committee, Select Committee in Parliament, around the triple penalty, if you like, the intersectionality that Muslim women face. First of all, being Muslim women, being a woman from ethnic minority, and also a visible Muslim woman, you know, somebody with a headscarf. And those kind of rhetoric that's been out in the media hasn't helped the kind of violence and the abuse that Muslim women get, not only physical abuse on the streets and verbal abuse, but online. You know, if you see the kind of abuse that goes online, this is by strangers. And of course, we've got perpetrators that are husbands and brothers and, you know, family members. So there's lots to talk about in this field, but I think one of the things we've been doing is educating the women as well as the men. Women in terms of where to get help, why it's so important to come out of domestic abuse situation and the impacts it has on children from a very young age. So I've done lots of conferences to a congregation size of 10,000. For the last 8 years, we've been supporting the White Ribbon campaign, male violence against women, and delivering something quite unique, again, using the voice of men to end domestic abuse. So we have our imams delivering sermons. In 2017, we signed up a charter with imams across London to end female genital mutilation because it doesn't come from the faith tradition. And men use that as an excuse to highlight the issues and highlight the stories and the impacts it's had on women. And we have a rising Somali community who is mostly affected by this. So there's been some groundbreaking work. Again, we have to talk about Sarah Everett and Sabina Nessa. We decided to do a vigil in the mosque because women felt unsafe to go to her vigil in Greenwich, which kind of really took me back because I thought, you know, the irony of it. All here we are, you know, all wanting to go to this vigil, but the community asked me, can you do something in the Mariam Centre? And so we started it with prayers, but we also had people from the council, we had police officers, we had the hate crime team, we had the reverends and rabbis from different faith communities, all in solidarity to reassure people. Because when a Muslim woman gets murdered, it sends a different kind of shockwave across the community. It reinstates this fear that every mother has, you know, whether you're Muslim or non-Muslim. I have 3 daughters. So when they're out and about, there's always this, we're always kind of tagging them where they are just to make sure they're safe, they've arrived safely. But Sabina Nessa was going to see a friend and it was still light and she was murdered. And that impact meant that Muslim women are set back again. So it's years of work that we've been doing to empower women to get into education, to get into employment, even with all the kind of institutional biases and discriminations that we all face as women, to take part in society and you know, be part of the social mobility, which is really important because I'm going on a bit.
No, I'm going to stop you in just a moment. Yeah, that's why I was just like, I was giving you the, I was trying to give you the subtle eye, but
so,
I realised it wasn't very subtle. I'll just get you to wrap up and then I'll chat to Kat as well.
So I could talk all day about this, but I think it's really important to understand that different women face different things, and we'll talk about what men can do and what we're doing. And I mentioned already some of the work that we've done in our own communities to ensure that this doesn't happen. In Tower Hamlets alone, in the last 10 years, there's been 6 murders. I'm on the domestic homicide review panel, and some of the gruesome cases that I deal with. I know Parm was talking about her side of things, but being in that panel and seeing how we as a community failed those women really sends alarming responses for us as a community to look at what we can do more. And we'll talk about what we can do.
Absolutely,
with that,
I want to make sure that we get that. I'll just move on to Kat quickly because I know that there's going to be loads of questions and I've got a couple of questions to ask. Kat, I just wanted to hear from you and your experiences as well.
Thank you so much. And I will speak briefly so that we can move on, because I'm sure everyone's keen to. So when I was thinking about what I could bring to this discussion amongst, an amazing group of what are experts, really, I'm very much not an expert. I'm a third-year student. And I thought I could bring the perspective of where gendered violence still affects and is such a normative, unconscious practice in our lives as young women and as students. And so when I was thinking of what I was going to say, I reflect on the fact that on next Friday is the Reclaim the Night March in Cambridge. And I'm sure many of you know the first Reclaim the Night March was in 1977 in Leeds in response to the Yorkshire Ripper murders, when women were told to stay home, not go out and protect themselves. And so completely rightly, there was a protest of why should women be the ones who are taking the proactive measures. And almost 50 years later, I think it's about 45 technically, I was struck to think that how little has changed, of how much women are still afraid to walk alone at night, and how much these unconscious practices of taking safety precautions still dictate the way we spend our nights out, the way we have fun, the way we exist in this world after, 7:30 in the evening, and how the rhetoric is still on women to take these precautions. And so I could speak of many different instances, and I'm not going to for the sake of time, of where this is happening in a university context. But one I particularly wanted to draw everyone's attention to is to spiking, which especially recently has been a major issue at this university, as with many other places. So for anyone who doesn't know, spiking is when alcohol or drugs is put into someone's system without their consent and often without their knowledge, either via drink or via injection. And this was happening on a massive scale at Cambridge, and especially last term. There was instances at college-only events where you needed a university card to get in. There were 43 cases reported since January until November, and over half of these, alarmingly, went unresolved. And so women are entering into college events knowing that they're not safe within this community from being injected, being drugged, and possible consequences of that. And yet it's still women who are taking the precautions and adapting. One story which I was pretty horrified to hear was after the varsity ski trip, which happened in December. There was one night where I think it was 3 or 4 women were spiked by injection, again at a university-only event. And so the following night, all the women were wearing coats, long sleeves, anything they could to have fun, to exist in that space as a woman and feel some degree of safe. And what makes this all the more shocking is this discrepancy in awareness of this issue, of, when you speak to your male friends, and there seems to be a lack of awareness of the amount that taking precautions for our very sort of basic safety dictates our actions, of thinking, am I safe to go on this night out? How will I get home? Can I walk to the boat club at 5 a.m. or should I, constantly having to prep, to think in advance. And so I'm sure we'll move on to how, what can be done about this. And I'm not really going to speak about that now. But I suppose the main takeaway of what I wanted to say is that, 50 years or almost 50 years after the start of these Reclaim the Night marches and of this sort of climate of fear for women of all ages, very, very little has changed in terms of how women exist in the world and the discrepancy.
Kat, thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for those opening remarks. I'm going to ask a question to each of these wonderful women here, and then please put up your hands, wave them if you like, and also get in touch online as well. And I will keep refreshing and make sure that I get loads of questions, because obviously these women have such great expertise and they're so knowledgeable that they they overran. So I will make sure that I get in as many questions as I can, and I'll be really brief in my questions, just to make sure that I get the full experience of getting to speak to these guys. Parm, I wanted to kick off with you, and just you were speaking so passionately about the cases that you have experienced and gone through, and walking through women who've been raped and dealing with families of people who have been murdered. I wanted to talk a little bit more about why you decided, why leave? You were so passionate, seemingly at the top of your game. Why did you go?
One of the reasons that I left was because I was the one who was always standing up. I was the one who was always fighting for change. And when you, in the police service, there is a toxic culture. And I enjoyed my time, and I would still recommend policing to any person, whether you're young or old. If you're thinking about joining, it's a fantastic career. But I got to the stage where I was fighting constantly. And if you're the whistleblower, the police has a toxic sort of culture where you are then alienated, you are the person on the outside, and it just got too much for me. And I can give you an example in that in the Met Police, Black and Asian officers make up about 14% of the actual makeup of the workforce. But they've got an anonymous phone call line thing that you can ring up and you can say, oh, Ayshah's stealing, she's dishonest, or whatever you want to say. 3/4 of those calls are about Black and Asian officers. So these calls don't come from the public, they come from your colleagues that are too frightened to challenge you about your behaviour or whatever. But 3/4 of these calls are about Black and Asian colleagues. Now, I was a chief superintendent, and there were 12 of us at chief super. I was the only woman, and there were a number of superintendent as well, all men. Of those 12, 9 of us, including me, were under investigation for false allegations. So I got to the point where I just couldn't fight anymore. So I left, but not so that I could be shut up, so that I could write my book, tell it how it was, and also stand here and go to the panels, go to the community meetings and speak from outside, because I've been there, I've done it, and I can say, this is what happens. And just very, very quickly, the Charing Cross incident with the 9 officers, a female officer highlighted that. A female officer stood up and said, there is a male colleague who is bringing drunk and vulnerable women here and having sex with them. Her career is over. She's going to be isolated. She's never going to get promoted. She's not going to have any lateral development. That's what's going to happen to her. Now, I'm on the outside shouting for that change to protect individuals who are brave enough to call it out. That's why I left.
And just very briefly, I wanted to ask why, with Cressida Dick's resignation, you gave your kind of initial response, and I just wanted to give you the space just to say a little bit more about that. Was it right that she went at the time that she did? Should she have gone earlier? And looking at women under attack, has she actually been in the way of making sure that progress happens within the Met?
I think Cressida Dick did exceedingly well. She had the support of the Federation. She had the support of a lot of officers. But at the same time, she let a lot of officers down, female officers, including me. I had a conversation with her in 2019 where I told her that she was taking the Metropolitan Police backwards, that she was going back to the Macpherson days. So I was honest enough to speak to her about it and tell her how I felt. It was time for her to go because she was no longer communicating with real people. She wasn't communicating with the officers who were trying to talk to her, and she wasn't communicating with the public. There's been no real consultation. It needs to be a new leadership who are willing to talk to the public, who are willing to say, okay, you think we're institutionally racist, misogynistic, sexist. Okay, I accept that. What do we do about it? Accept the label and look for a solution. If you don't accept the label, you're never ever going to say there's a problem. You're never going to solve that problem. So yes, it is time for her to go, and it's time for a huge shake-up to make a difference.
Karen, just feeding off the back of that, hearing all of these structural issues with the Met, but then also other police forces as well. How does that make you feel hearing about that when you deal with women day in, day out who've been under attack, essentially?
Well, it's not a surprise because the organisation I work for supports more than 1,000 women and girls a year. So that just sounds very familiar. And, you know, we know that something's going wrong when we look at the number of rapes that are reported that result in convictions. And when we say 1.4%, remember, that's not of what rapes happen, it's of the ones that get reported and I think charged. So in terms of, you know, rape's practically decriminalised in this country. So yeah, my response sadly is a bit of a shrug. Yeah, I know that's what we deal with.
If that's what we deal with, so how do you solve a problem like that? What would you say to people who are still in the Met or are still in the police force, just to say, look, something needs to be done, we need to do something about this? You know, even taking rape convictions, for example, what can we do?
I would say that I've never worked in a big institution like the Met. I've always worked in small independent women's organisations supporting women victims of men's violence. So I have no idea what to do to turn around a massive organisation of that size. I think, you know, it obviously starts with the recruitment and training and the sort of cultural attitudes that are held by an organisation. But, you know, Cressida Dick was on a lot of money and she had a lot of experience and she failed to do it. So I've no idea.
Okay. I sense two lovely women here with their microphones going around. So if you do have questions that you are burning to ask, do pop your hand up. I'm going to just go to Sufia with a question here. You were talking about Muslim women in particular. Just to explain, just briefly, what is it that makes Muslim women more of a target sometimes when they are out? That intersectionality of being a woman, visibly Muslim. What can make that more difficult for women?
I think it's the rhetoric that the media has portrayed of a Muslim woman. I mean, we had our own Prime Minister labelling Muslim women who choose to wear the niqab as letterboxes, and that's disgusting because he hasn't even apologised for that. So those kind of rhetoric and of what Muslim women in general could wear or not wear, that's defined by men, is a big issue. And
how much do words have, like, I was going to ask about that, words have an impact even online?
Yeah.
How much do they have an impact on the physical, do you think?
Well, it does, because it means the rhetoric that comes out is that Muslim women are weak and they're submissive and everyone's got a right to pull their scarves or push them on a rail track. Since 9/11, I've had to wear 2 pins to secure my scarf because I fear when I'm on the train that it's going to be pulled off. And we've had experiences of that. And we talk about reporting. Muslim women have long campaigned about reporting. Muslim women don't come forward to report. In 2017, hate crime reports went up by 500%. Yet Muslim women were not reporting their crimes, and it was the crimes that were onto them. And we've had lots of conversations with the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, to see how to make it better, victim support, but it's still not enough, you know. And I think it's also fanned by the far right as well, unfortunately. But whether you're a Muslim woman or a woman of colour or, you know, any women, everyone's got the right to stay safe and go about the business. But with Muslim women, we're already behind the economic situation in terms of education and things like that. When Sabina Nessa's murder happened, young women were coming up to us and saying, my mum's not letting me go back to university. I can't come home at night on that train. You know, this is 2022.
Just in that, just wanted to move on to Kat, because you were running in lockdown, weren't you? And I think I read in the notes, correct me if I'm wrong. And I had a similar experience because I was running in lockdown and I was catcalled by some absolute idiot that I swore at. But I just wanted to hear more about your experience as a young woman in 2022. What are the things that you have to do, the things that you have to say that are different to a men's experience, for example? Like when I'm walking home from the station, I will always call my partner and let him know I'm walking home, it's going to take 10 minutes or whatever. I always do it.
Yeah, I mean, I could, talk all day about the precautions.
Talk briefly.
Take, but talk briefly. I mean, the incident you're referring to is, I was telling Dorothy about this, that I had a 10-day streak of being harassed every single day on a run in the centre of town at 9 a.m. And that was during the COVID lockdown. And I think, with less, what do you call it? Less
people about?
Yeah, fewer people
Yeah,
about.
it was weird, wasn't it?
There was no comeuppance of, harassment. And it was just happening everywhere I went. I mean, now that there's more people on the streets, it's slightly changed. But every time I go on a run now, I'm still reminded, for 10 days straight, when I walked on this street, someone cut me off with a moped, or they tried to touch me, or every time I go on a run, that's still in the back of my brain. And so precautions that I take, there are all sorts of things: faking phone calls as I walk home, getting someone to cycle home with me, even the passageway that I live on, as I spoke again with Dorothy about, I'll never get dropped off just at the end of that passageway. They have to get me all the way to the end, because even that 100 meters is unsafe. And so it's, as small as you can make it every time you leave the house.
I'm seeing a lot of nodding in the audience as well. And my best friend lives round the corner from where Sarah Everard was picked up. And so even when we went on a night out recently, I made sure I walked her to her door and she was there. With that, I want to move on to questions from the audience. If anyone has a question, please put your hand up and we'll get round to you. I know the microphones are just there. So if you just say your name, and if you have a specific question targeted at someone, just say their name, or just do that.
My name's Annabella. I studied classics. I'm now a trainee solicitor, and I'm currently in the family department at my firm. So as some people might be aware, a new Domestic Abuse Act came into force, was brought in last year. It went some way to protect women, it expanded the definition of domestic abuse, and took some steps to try and improve the court process for women. I was wondering what further things you would like to see brought in legally in the future to help protect women, and also whether you think maybe the issue isn't so much the law, but the way it's enforced.
Does anyone particularly want to take that?
Do you want me to start?
Parm? Yeah.
I can start, yeah. I know the bill that you're talking about, and with legal changes, yes, they're important and they are welcomed. We have got a huge legal structure already in place. The reason it's falling down is because individuals are not being supported to actually get to court. The police officers who are looking after them are changed. So you could have one police officer who starts taking your report, somebody else a week later, somebody else a month later. And in relation to more serious sexual offences, as in the rapes, there used to be rape suites. Due to financial restrictions, those rape suites were then shared between 3 stations. Then it was shared on an area, so you'd have one for East, one for West. And now you have to book a slot in a rape suite to actually take a rape victim to. Now, if that case then goes on for, it could take a year, it could take 18 months. In that period of time, the police officer looking after that individual will have changed on a number of occasions. The police are reliant on charities who will then support that individual through the court system or victim support. The charities are funded on a yearly basis. They may go out of business. There's no continuity. Who does that victim talk to? Who do they confide in? They've put their life on hold, and they're the ones who are brave enough to actually take those steps. So, yeah, you can change the law, you can put in more legislation, but if you're not actually, you haven't got the funding to actually support the victims who are brave enough. We have funding for gangs units, we have funding for drugs units, we have funding for counter-terrorism. There is no set funding for rapes, domestic violence, misogyny, women's issues. that funding doesn't exist in the same way. It's not seen as the place to be.
Shall I pick up
Yeah,
and
please do.
run with that?
Yeah.
Just so what you said about independent women's organisations, one of the services that we run is East London Rape Crisis, and NIA, like most organisations, our financial year runs from April to March. I'm looking at a massive deficit in my budget for the coming financial year. Every year I'm in this position. Our staff are paid less than local authority staff. They're often coming to the end of the contract, so that they're less likely to stay in post. There's a massive insecurity, job insecurity in women's services. I think my perspective is that when a woman has been subjected to sexual violence, it's good to have independent support, an ISVA, that's Independent Sexual Violence Advocate, to support her as she goes through the criminal justice system. And I see good working relationships between somebody's named, are they called SOE officers still?
Yeah.
And ISVAs, they can work in partnerships really well. But it often takes a couple of years, like Parm said, to get to court. And it, to have to make different relationships, it's
that turnover of everything that kind of stops it. I'm just going to try and get as many.
Question. I'm really angry that it was a domestic abuse bill and not a men's violence against women's bill. Yeah. And I'm really angry that migrant women, women with no recourse, don't get the same protections as other women. I think that's absolutely disgusting.
Just very quickly, for those of you who don't know, a SOE officer is a sexual offences investigation techniques officer who's specially trained.
Thanks for that, Parm. I'll move on to another question because I think we'll only have time for that and one more. So let's get that question.
Hi, I'm Clara Spettit. I was also a women's officer and I currently work in the civil service and defence. And I'm kind of struck by, Catrin, your point about the Reclaim the Night March being next week. I was so angry at Sarah Everard's vigil because the same chants were being made at the vigil that I had done in a Reclaim the Night March, and it's kind of horrifying that has been said for the last 50 years. And what you were just saying about being angry, it's so angry, but nothing has changed, or there are individual cases of people like you dedicating your lives to this. My question is, what are we waiting for? Are we waiting for a PM who cares? Or, I'm a civil servant, maybe don't record that.
Save that.
Are we waiting for a hero here? Are we waiting, what action can be done? Or else there's going to be women's officers in 20 years' time saying the same thing, making the same chants.
Can I just very quickly come in?
And then I'll go to Kat, and then we'll get the next question.
I just want to say, you are the heroes. Everybody in this room is a hero. You have the ability to make your voice heard. You have the ability to write a letter to your MP, to write a letter to the Commissioner of Police, to write a letter to Priti Patel, who's doing a review of policing misogyny and after what's happened with the Wayne Couzens issues. So every single person in here has that power. Don't look for a hero outside. You are the heroes. Sorry, Kat, it's yours.
Oh, no. I mean,
Kat was about to say the same thing.
Yeah.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I mean, the shame of the matter is, I think a lot of the responsibility still falls on women's shoulders to educate the men that surround them in what they can do in terms of making women feel safer on the streets. Because until I stop hearing these stories of gendered violence, I'm still going to be scared when I see a man walking towards me at night. And so there's things that men can obviously do, walk slower behind you or cross over the road. But I think the main thing, which in the kind of immediate setting of the university, which I think would kind of shock the system, is accountability, specifically for spiking or for other things. If there's cases I've heard of an entirety of a female drinking society being spiked by a male drinking society, that male drinking society is accountable for that spiking. And if that got, properly prosecuted, that is, that would shock the system, I think, of if any of these cases were properly prosecuted and taken to the highest level of the university, disciplinary action, and even legal. I think, there'd be a shift in the, oh yes, this is men's responsibility to stop doing this rather than women's responsibility to keep speaking up about it.
And Sufia, what is the one thing that you would like to kind of see, the change that you would like to see?
I think it's about men taking ownership of this as well, and men educating men as well, not just women educating men. The White Ribbon Campaign does that really well, but we're also part of something called Ayshah, which is Employment and Workplace Domestic Abuse. And so every workplace should sign up to that, because people are more likely to talk about these things at peer groups, and then you can have that education.
Is it where you're comfortable? I was really shocked by the figure. I think it was 25 times you said it takes.
35 times.
35, sorry, I got that wrong. I heard that
35
wrong. I'm even more
attempts,
shocked now. 35 attempts.
So people live with those situations and they hide it. And, workplace having those kind of mechanisms to support people, that's the first step. But what really angers me, and I'll just add this on, building trust with the police after Sarah Everard is a big thing, and we work very closely with our local borough commander. Obviously, what happened to the two sisters in Freya Park, also, dampening
the Henry Nicole Small. Yeah.
Exactly. So these kind of relations need to be built up. We can't wait for the next borough commander because people are dying. And what we need to do is we need to call it out when we see it. We need to be united, men and women, because these are our daughters, our mothers, our sisters. These are our children. This is our future. And one of the things, I'll stop here, what really motivates me, in our faith, we say killing one person is like killing the whole of humanity. One too many deaths have happened, and we need to stop it.
Absolutely. Is there another question that we want to get in? Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm Patricia Zurita. I'm the Chief Executive of BirdLife International. I come from the green sector, so this is great to hear from you all, and thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I was really struck by, Sufia, your statement about how you have engaged the imams and them becoming champions anti the mutilation. But I wanted to ask Pam and Kat whether we have thought about engaging men to be champions of the cause. Because I think we are shouting aloud, we are raising our voices, but unless we actually get men to not only the accountability that you were just talking about, Sufia, but also be champions and defenders of the cause, I'm not sure how much we're going to be able to change the situation. So can you speak a little bit about your experience of men following your, your examples and in the police force, whether they were also whistleblowers?
I'll let you go first this time.
Oh, thank you. There's one thing that kind of sticks out as an example of men taking initiative in my kind of sphere, which is what's now called the Beyond Equality Initiative, which used to be called the Good Lad Initiative, in case people have heard of that, which is a group run by men, for men and boys, which speaks on sort of tackling gender norms and working towards gender equality, often in, towards consent, and various things that affect gender violence. And I think these sorts of, these are places where change could happen, I think. I had a very sweet example the other day of someone who was, on the men's rugby team came up to me and was like, oh, Kat, I've just been to this Beyond Equality workshop and now I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, about how he's going to change what he was doing, which was very sort of endearing and not necessarily the way that things are going to change. But if these conversations are happening amongst men, it takes some of the weight off of women to, firstly process the sort of pervasive threat that you feel at, existing as a woman, but then also having to constantly be advocating and educating, that men taking some of that responsibility through things like the Beyond Equality Initiative, I think is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm. I'm just going to add to what Kat said there. You have to take men with you. Women on their own can't solve this problem. the men have to be brought into it. They have to recognise their behaviours. There are training issues, there are education issues. But that education isn't just about young boys at school. This is educating the older community as well, the older men who may think that they're being funny, it's banter, it's acceptable. It's not. And that education starts with education at school, but it's got to carry on. And you've got to capture the older age group as well, who are party to some of the behaviours that are unacceptable. So yeah, absolutely, men have to be engaged. And unfortunately, men normally hold the purse strings, which is why all the money is being taken out of the complex cases and the complex investigations. So men have to be brought into it.
We literally only have, oh my God, Karen, we literally only have about like 1 or 2 minutes left. And I want to get a final, and I want to get a final, I want to get a final thought from you, from you all. So then I'll start with you then. Just a final thought that you would like to leave the audience with today.
We live in a patriarchal society. Men have been in charge since time immemorial. They've had fucking decades to get their shit sorted out. So what do I want men to do? You can stop wanking off to porn. You can stop buying sex from women. These men that are drugging young women at college, they've got friends that know what they're doing. If you know any bloke that's doing that, report him. Take some responsibility.
Sophia, do you want to top that? There we go.
I will not be going to that kind of language, but I think it's...
All right.
Oh, I've gone down a hole, don't worry. It's fine. It's fine. Sophia, I upstaged you for a moment, but do carry on.
I think we need to be united and we need to support all women and educate from a very young age. So we change this rhetoric that's out in the media. Misogyny needs to be highlighted as a hate crime. And you know, we need to start saving lives.
Great. And Kat, what's your final thought?
I suppose mine is that I think accountability and solidarity are the only ways that we're going to make any step forward. Solidarity amongst women, believing women, supporting other women, and holding accountable those who need to be. I think that's,
Lovely. And I'll leave the last word for you, Parm. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, every single one of you has a voice. This is the call to action. Write to the Home Secretary. She's doing a review at the moment. Write to the Commissioner if you've got anything to do with London. Make your voices heard. Be part of that consultation and make sure it's different going forward.
Thank you all so much, Parm, Karen, Sufia and Kat, as well as all of you for watching and for watching online as well. I've learned so much even just through that, and I feel like I'm really glad that we ended on a positive, don't watch porn, do this, do that, and just loads of steps that we can do, because I think that when you think about this whole problem, you can feel quite helpless. So it was really good to hear from all of you. And thank you all so much. Thank you.